A very good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 17th June 2025, and today we have some very important topics for the discussion. So, without any further delay, let's get into the discussion and let's try to understand all these important topics which are covered in different newspapers in a very detailed and in-depth manner, so that this discussion will be certainly helpful for you in your exam. So the first topic with which we're going to start this discussion is about the India-Bangladesh maritime conflict, particularly with respect to the Bay of Bengal region. Now, in fact, India and Bangladesh are one of the close countries which are maintaining close ties since the liberation of Bangladesh. So, however, in recent times, there has been a shift in Bangladesh engagement with India, particularly after the regime change and the new regime led by Mr. Mohammad Yunus. Now, in this context, there is a growing anti-India rhetoric or sentiment in Bangladesh, and that has been leading to creating new blocks or new roadblocks in further strengthening the bilateral relations between India and Bangladesh. Now, so what is the context and why this article has been given? And before discussing that, this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this could be important for your Gender Studies paper 2. For your Gender Studies paper 2, this is a very important topic, because previously also such questions on India-Bangladesh relations have been asked in Gender Studies paper 2. So therefore this topic is very important. So the context is that India has recently taken a decision to revoke Bangladesh transshipment facility. Now, what does this transshipment facility actually means? For example, Bangladesh is actually known for the textile manufacturing, and the textile which is manufactured in Bangladesh would be shifted to the transshipment facilities. These transshipment facilities are located across India. So if Bangladesh wanted to export the textiles and other manufactured goods from Bangladesh to other parts of India, first Bangladesh first need to send those goods to transshipment facilities which are located in India. And from these transshipment facilities, these goods would be exported to different parts of the world, whether it is Europe, whether it is USA, Latin America, African continent. So to all these different regions, if Bangladesh wanted to export its apparel, textiles and other manufactured goods, so since Bangladesh is lacking the transshipment facilities, Bangladesh has been dependent on India's transshipment facilities to export its manufactured goods. But recently, India has taken a decision to revoke Bangladesh transshipment facility access because of a growing strategic tension that has sparked a debate over the politicization of regional trade. And in fact, Bangladesh has accused India of politicizing the regional trade. However, not just India, Bangladesh also has taken many decisions in recent times, and that amounts to politicization of regional trade. And here, one thing that we should understand is that Bangladesh is considered as India's largest trading partner in entire South Asia, and India is also maintaining a positive trade balance with Bangladesh. Now, in this context, there are allegations of politicization of regional trade by both Bangladesh and India as well. However, India seeks to lead BIMSTEC's maritime integration. Now here, what exactly is BIMSTEC? So BIMSTEC is called as a Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, and this is a 7-member grouping. Right, so this is a 7-member grouping, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, and in this grouping, both India and Bangladesh are the founding members. Both India and Bangladesh are founding members of the BIMSTEC grouping. Now here, India wanted to lead BIMSTEC's maritime integration, and this move would risk undermining its regional credibility and even the cooperative vision as well. right? So this is the context in which this article is being discussed, and in this context we need to understand navigating the trade and strategy in the Bay of Bengal region. So how India will navigate trade and the strategy to counter Chinese growing influence in the Bay of Bengal region. Now when we talk about India's engagement with Bangladesh and other countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia. Now we need to talk about some important strategic ports such as Visakhapatnam port is on the eastern coast in the state of Andhra Pradesh, and Paradip port is in the state of Odisha, and Haldia port is in the state of West Bengal. So these ports actually witnessed a steady growth in the cargo throughput, right? So most of these ports are the eastern ports of India. And in fact, the government of India has already launched a program called Sagarmala program. So this Sagarmala program is a port-led development model. So this is a port-led development model, right? So this is called as the Sagarmala program. And apart from the Sagarmala program, so there is also a GST related incentives. All these factors have significantly boosted coastal shipping in recent times, and that could be one reason why the eastern ports such as Visakhapatnam, Paradip and Haldia have been experiencing the higher growth of cargo throughput in recent times. And in fact, as part of the Sagarmala program, the government is developing the infrastructure. The government has been developing infrastructure as part of the Sagarmala program. However, these developments on the part of India actually reflect India's larger intent and commitment to anchor itself as a regional maritime trade hub. Now, in fact, India wanted to anchor itself as a regional maritime trade hub. However, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation Maritime Transport Cooperation Agreement was signed in early 2025. However, so this Maritime Transport Cooperation Agreement signed as part of the BIMSTEC in early 2025 aims to streamline the custom processes among the member countries, and it wanted to reduce the regulatory frictions which are already in existence, and it also wanted to encourage a multimodal linkages among the member countries. So this is what the Maritime Transport Cooperation Agreement aimed to do. And apart from that, this particular cooperation agreement is also designed to enhance the intra-regional trade. And in fact, it is being said that BIMSTEC has been established as an alternative to the South Asian Association for the Regional Cooperation, because the regional South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation is not working as per its potential. Right? In fact, SAARC has been inspired from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and in fact, Association of Southeast Asian Nations is a successful organization, but SAARC is not working as per its potential. And in order to overcome the difficulties, a BIMSTEC as an organization has been established in Southeast Asia and South Asia. And in fact, so this particular BIMSTEC cooperation agreement designed to enhance the intra-regional trade connectivity, especially for a landlocked member states such as Bhutan and Nepal. Right? So we all knew that Bhutan and Nepal are part of the BIMSTEC grouping, and they are the landlocked countries. But this Maritime Transport Cooperation Agreement also aimed to enhance the intra-regional trade and connectivity as well. And even India revoked a Cree transshipment facility that was previously granted to Bangladesh, citing port congestion. And in fact, Bangladesh has viewed this as a politicized rollback of earlier cooperation by India. Right? So this is how the things are actually unfolding between India and Bangladesh. Now, so we can say that there is a strategic signaling and economic retaliation on the part of India towards Bangladesh. So because there is a clear anti-India rhetoric, anti-India sentiment that has been growing in Bangladesh. So therefore, there is also a clear strategic signaling and economic retaliation from India can also be observed from recent moves by India. Because the withdrawal of India, because as we have already discussed that India has withdrawn or revokes its the transshipment facility that has been provided to Bangladesh, and this withdrawal would affect Bangladesh ready-made garment exports. So remember, as I have already told you, that Bangladesh is considered as a leader when it comes to exporting the manufactured textiles, and in fact this ready-made garment export sector alone contributes to around 85% of the total foreign exchange earnings of the state of Bangladesh. So therefore, India revoking the transshipment facility to Bangladesh, where these transshipment facilities are used by Bangladesh to export its ready-made garments to other parts of the world, would severely impact its foreign trade, particularly its foreign exchange earnings. So therefore, this would likely impact Bangladesh. And in fact, the alternatives that the Bangladesh has been finding apart from India via Sri Lanka or Southeast Asia are much more costlier than India. And in fact, they are much more slower as well. So therefore, these factors would further strain or would further limit Bangladesh trade competitiveness in a slowing global market. Right? So because India has already withdrawn the transshipment facility, Bangladesh has been now looking for the alternatives such as Sri Lanka or Southeast Asia, but they also have their limitations because it is much more costlier and it is also much more slower. So overall, it would strain Bangladesh trade competitiveness in slowing global market. And in fact, India even restricted 7 categories of Bangladeshi goods, including garments, processed foods, via a northeast land ports as well. So after India revokes the transshipment facility access to Bangladeshi exports to other parts of the world, India even taken another major decision. So that can be considered as an economic retaliation, right? So India has decided to restrict restrict access to Bangladeshi goods via northeast land ports, thereby redirecting them to a more distant seaports like Kolkata and Navsheva. And in fact, Indian officials also cited the retaliatory reasoning linking it to Bangladesh curbs on yarn imports as well. And in fact, India's actions further appear to introduce a conditionality into the regional trade frameworks once they are considered political, right? So therefore, in this particular context, the strategic use of the trade levers, so that could signal a regional partners that the strategic use of the levers. For example, India revoking the transshipment hub facility that has been provided to Bangladesh. So all these factors could actually signal to regional partners of India that India's commitments may shift based on the bilateral tensions which are existing, thereby further weakening the trust underpinning the BIMSTEC cooperation as well. So this would further send a strategic signaling to other countries which have a strong bilateral relations, and those countries which are also part of the BIMSTEC grouping, and ultimately it would weaken the trust in BIMSTEC cooperation. However, so what could be the likely strategic implications? So we should also understand the likely strategic implications of this move. Now, in fact, the strategic implications involve India's port and logistic infrastructure. So they actually remain unmatched in the Bay of Bengal. So in fact, India is having enormous port and logistical infrastructure, so that no country can actually match within the Bay of Bengal. However, strategic signaling that India has been sending through trade instruments, so they may affect India's overall credibility, because as of now, it is being said that India is being viewed as an elder brother, not as a big brother in the region. So therefore, such measures followed by India against Bangladesh would actually result in a big brother attitude, right? So such a big brother attitude from India would be viewed with skepticism by other member countries of the BIMSTEC, and ultimately it would undermine the cooperation among the member countries within the BIMSTEC grouping. So I hope you're clear about this, right? And in fact, smaller neighbors may even seek alternatives to hedge against the political unpredictability as well, right? So it is being said that a political unpredictability which is actually existing, and the smaller neighbors may even seek the alternatives, right? So for example, Nepal may look for alternatives like China, so that it can hedge against the political unpredictability that is associated with India, that is existed within the grouping. And in fact, in recent times, we can also see that there has been an enhanced engagement of Bangladesh with China as well, right? So therefore, there is a reopening of maritime trade with Pakistan. And recently, the interim government's chief, Mr. Mohammad Yunus, also had a visit to China, and in China also he made certain remarks, and those remarks are against India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He was directly asking China to come in and invest in Bangladesh, and in fact in Northeast as well, right? So therefore, a maritime trade which is reopening with Pakistan and self-projection as a regional transit node actually reflect the broader strategic rebalancing on the part of Bangladesh. However, so in this particular context, if India appears intolerant of such choices, so it actually risks being seen as a coercive rather than cooperative. To build trust, so there is a need to build a trust by India so that India can convince its smaller neighbors. Now, India's smaller neighbors would not go into the arms of China, and that is also very, very important for India. So therefore, to build trust, India could actually consider instituting a transparent, rules-based transshipment mechanism insulated from the political fluctuations. So it must be insulated from the political fluctuations, and that is a very, very important to build trust, right? So among all its neighbors, particularly among the smaller neighbors. So therefore, this would reinforce Bay of Bengal as a shared economic space rather than a theater of geopolitical contestation among the member countries. And that is a very, very important aspect here. Now, few things that we should understand from this particular topic. So one thing is that, so we all knew that a strained relationship between India and Bangladesh, and the strained relationship between India and Bangladesh is followed by a series of economic decisions, a series of economic decisions that have been taken by the government of India, and these economic decisions have resulted in limiting Bangladesh access to India's transshipment hubs, and also India restricting Bangladeshi goods entering into India's northeastern states through the ports, through the land ports. So therefore, these decisions would resulted in a skepticism among smaller neighbors of India. So particularly among the BIMSTEC member countries. So if these BIMSTEC member countries, for example Nepal, Bhutan, so if they believe that India may use the coercive methods so that India has followed in the case of Bangladesh, so then these smaller countries would invite other regional powers such as China to hedge against India, and that's how the Chinese influence would substantially increase in the region. However, increasing Chinese influence in India's neighborhood is not in the best interest of India. So therefore, there is a need to build trust among India's smaller neighbors, among the BIMSTEC member countries. So India need to look for the better solutions that can build trust among the member countries, and that will also help India counter Chinese growing influence in the India's neighborhood, and ultimately it will result in continuous approach of India or attitude of India as an elder brother instead of the big brother, because India's smaller neighbors very often complain that India is very often acting as a big brother instead of elder brother. Right? So I hope you have understood this particular topic. And the next important topic is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the G7 summit. Now, what is the context? The context is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to participate in 2025 G7 summit. It is going to take place in Canada. And in fact, we have already discussed about this summit in our previous classes as well. Now, when I say the G7 summit, so it is a group of 7 industrialized, developed and democracies, right? So the G7 member countries, I hope you knew all G7 member countries. So they are US, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Italy and UK. Right? So these are the 7 member countries which are part of the G7. However, India from 2019 onwards every year is invited as the guest country to the G7 meetings. So despite a setback to India-Canada relations during the Justin Trudeau's regime, now new Canadian Prime Minister has invited Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to attend the G7 summit, and that is why it is a significant aspect that we need to discuss about, because the grouping as of now has been facing a profound internal divergences over trade, defense, climate and the geopolitical crisis. So on all these different aspects, on all these different factors, the grouping has a major divergences that they don't have a common agreement on this, right? So in this backdrop, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's attendance in this G7 summit is significant, is important. Now, in fact, it is also being said that India's presence actually offers an opportunity to recalibrate its multi-alignment strategy amid the reshaping global order. Now, it is being said that the global order is being reshaped, right? So it is being reshaped. Like how it is being reshaped? Because earlier during the Cold War times, the world order was the bipolar world order, because there were 2 centers of power. And after the collapse of Soviet Union, there was a unipolar world order, because US has emerged as a sole superpower. And after that, now in the 21st century, the world order is being said as a multipolar world order. And in fact, India follows a strategy called a multi-alignment strategy, right? So it is also being called as a strategy from which has been evolved from non-alignment, right? So India traditionally followed the non-alignment policy during the times of Cold War. So India's policy has evolved from non-alignment to multi-alignment strategy. And that is how, and that is why India's attendance in this G7 summit is very, very important. Now, India will engage a fragmented West. So in now West, the Europe and North America is not considered as a unified group, and in fact it is fragmented group, because there are a lot of divergences on number of issues, whether it is technology, defense or climate change, climate finance. In all these different areas there are a lot of divergences, and because of that reason, now this grouping is called as a fragmented West, right? Because Western democracies during the times of Cold War and even after the fall of Soviet Union, also most of the Western democracies, so they were united, and they even called as a symbol of unity as well. However, the G7 is actually now marked by a stark internal rifts or differences. There are a lot of differences between most of the member countries in this particular grouping. The differences over trade, defense spending, climate policy, and regional security. So on all these issues, for example, US would have a different stand. France would have a different stand. So all these countries have a different stand on number of issues, and that is why it is being called as a fragmented West. However, these differences that have been existing between all these member countries of G7 grouping have further sharpened, particularly over US tariffs. In recent times, US President Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on not just China, India, but also on most of the European countries, which are even part of the G7 as well. And NATO applications, because Donald Trump has been demanding that other members of the NATO grouping should contribute more instead of US alone contributing a lion's share in NATO's defense spending. And in fact, Middle East diplomacy over these different countries have a different approaches and attitudes towards the Middle East diplomacy. So all these factors have further led to a sharpening of differences among the G7 member countries. And in fact, Donald Trump again elected as the president of United States of America. So we also knew that Donald Trump is known as the flag bearer of the protectionist tendencies or American unilateralism, and it has further led to the disrupting transatlantic ties among Europe and the North America. And in fact, Donald Trump demands such as a 5% of GDP military expenditure threshold are viewed as excessive by most of the G7 countries, and that is where they have the disagreements, that is where they have the divergences. And these factors have been reflecting the deepening rifts that are existing between the US and other member countries of G7 and their strategic priorities as well. However, as we have already discussed, that this particular G7 summit is going to take place in Canada, and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, so he opted against issuing a joint communique, right? So he did not issue a joint communique in this G7 summit, so thereby signaling the absence of consensus, right? So generally, whenever any such meeting is being held, so the host country would issue a joint communique, and this joint communique symbolizes the consensus among the member countries on number of issues, right? So this time there is no joint communique issued by Canada, and that indicating absence of consensus among the member states. And this breaks from the G7 convention and underscores the challenges facing collective Western policy making in increasing the multipolar world order. Now, as I have already told you, that the world is now called as a multipolar world order. So it is no longer a unipolar world order, right? So I hope you have understood this, right? So India's strategic engagement with a divided West, because as I have already told you that India's policy has been evolved from non-alignment to the multi-alignment. So therefore, how India would engage with this divided West, right? So Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is going to attend this G7 meeting as a president. So therefore, it can actually provide India with a vantage point to observe the intra-Western contradictions, right? So India can closely observe what are the contradictions which are existing between all the member countries of the G7, and thereby India can calibrate on its own diplomatic alignments, because India's policy is multi-alignment, and India can actually align with most of these countries if it can carefully observe the contradictions which are existing among the G7 countries. And in fact, So it even allows India to further strengthen the bilateral ties without getting entangled in a collective Western disagreements, right? So that's in that, that is how it will benefit India, right? So India wanted to further strengthen the trade, technology, clean energy ties with most of these G7 group of countries. So if India carefully observes the intra grouping contradictions on number of these issues, India can actually navigate these contradictions well. And contrary to the perceptions of the monolithic West, so what is this monolithic West? So monolithic West actually means that Western values are same, Western cultures are same, and all these Western countries are mature democracies, and they commit for the democracy, they commit for the human rights, they commit for the civil liberties, and they also have one single voice. So this tendency is called as a monolithic West. And the intra-Western competition that has been existing between most of these Western countries has been a historical constant. From colonial rivalries to disputes during and even after the Cold War, it becomes a constant phenomenon. And in fact, so India follows the policy of multi-alignment, and this multi-alignment is somewhat similar to the earlier strategic engagements that India has adopted with both Western and non-Western powers even during the Cold War times also, right? So in fact, India worked with both Russia and China, so to promote a multipolarity, because India believes in a multipolar world order, not unipolar or bipolar world order, but India believes in multipolar world order. You might have heard about the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam slogan as well, right? So therefore India simultaneously engages with a number of countries, and this is what is called as India's policy of a multi-alignment, and that could further deepen its economic and technological cooperation with most of these Western powers. And this flexible interest-based diplomacy would further underpin India's rising global stature in divided international order, right? So therefore you have understood this. And now what will be the implications for India's foreign policy and India's global positioning? And this aspect also we should understand. Now between India and Canada and most of these G7 countries, they openly supporting the Khalistani protests, and Khalistanis are considered as an internal security threat for India. So these Khalistani protests and statements about the Kashmir from some countries so may attract media's attention, and they are considered as a peripheral in the larger strategic context that India's foreign policy with these countries. However, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's focus is expected to remain on high-level diplomacy, repositioning India in a global governance conversations, right? Because we have a number of priorities and we need to reposition India as a major player on these global governance conversations, whether it is climate change, artificial intelligence, or a trade, commerce, technology, defense, so all these aspects. And G7 plays a very, very important role in this. And in fact, in recent times during the Justin Trudeau's regime, so we had a strained ties with Canada over the diaspora issues, and they should not distract from the larger economic and diplomatic imperatives that we actually have. However, India must balance the principled positions with a pragmatic engagement, so that could actually prevent the long-term diplomatic isolation within the G7 ecosystem. Now, India must use the G7 platform to advocate the vision for multipolar world, because remember that India believes in a multipolar world order, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, right? So India also believes in a rules-based world order, and rules-based world order is also a very, very important, because that would reinforce the multipolar world order instead of unipolar world order or bipolar world order. So if there is a bipolar world order, that would further result in a Cold War-like condition as well. Now, active engagement in domains like climate policy, digital governance, and global trade, that can actually position India as a stabilizing force amid the Western divisions which are actually existing, right? So these will be the implications of India's attendance in G7 group of countries, and implications on India's foreign policy as well, right? So I hope you have understood this, and thank you so much. And if you like a class, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.